Good morning, everyone, and a good moed. For those that checked in yesterday, good moed is the time between the first days of the holiday and the final days of the holiday when we are able to kind of kick back a little bit and talk with each other about the beautiful aspects of this festival of Sukkot. And Sukkot is very packed holiday. It's 7 days, but it's very intense. There's so many different aspects of the day. There is the mitzvah to sit and eat in a sukkah. There is the mitzvah of the lulav and etrog. And then there's a mitzvah to be joyful. And that may be the hardest of all three, to be able to generate joy. To be happy, that may be your disposition. But to generate a feeling of joy is not always the easiest. So I'm going to do the next 3 days that we're together, today, Wednesday, and Thursday. I'm going to break apart these mitzvot so we can focus on each one of them just for a few minutes. Today we will focus on the name of the holiday, Sukkot, which comes from the mitzvah of eating in a sukkah. In a sukkah is that four-walled hut, and it's covered with a temporary covering, and that's very important. You can have 4 permanent walls that are there all year, made out of cinder block, brick, a fort. But the ceiling of this structure needs to be temporary nature, needs to be made of natural elements. Usually we use bamboo, you can use sticks, and it has to be a covering that covers the structure of the sukkah, but yet is flimsy enough, so to speak, to be able to see the sky, to be able to see heavens. And what is the purpose of this mitzvah? What does it mean? There are many, many different explanations. But the one that is most relevant for us today is that sometimes we build walls, but we always remain vulnerable. We always have to open ourselves to the possibilities that are above us, that come from God, that come from heaven. What we create around us, our defenses that surround us, that's what we're able to do. But we must never forget that there's something always higher than us, from which we draw our purpose and inspiration and motivation to move forward. That is what happened in the original sukkah. The original sukkah dates back to when the Jewish people left Egypt on the way to their holy land of Israel. They were traveling through the desert. They didn't have anything permanent other than their faith in God and their objective and their eye on the mission to reach the Holy Land. And so it is in our lives. We must always keep our eye above. We must always keep our eye to the mission that God has given us to reach our own Holy Land, our own promised land, the promises that He embedded within us. And therefore, it's very important to make sure that we visit a sukkah, even if you're in isolation, even if you're keeping yourself away from community members and activities and events, which I fully respect. Call me, email me. We can arrange that you can come visit a sukkah on your own when nobody's around. We have a sukkah here at the center in Newtown. We have a sukkah in Yardley and Doylestown. We have our personal sukkot. They're not being used the whole day. Call me, send me an email, say, Rabbi, I want to spend some time in the sukkah, in that special energy that the sukkah provides, and we will set aside a time that you and or your family or those that you do connect with are able to come and spend the time. A very important mitzvah. And I want to share a story, because so much of what we do is not just about the physical, actual practice, but also about the heart and the inspiration and the soul that we put into the practice, drawing the energy out of the practice. Judaism is not a dry religion. We have many rituals, and it'd be such a shame if we just get stuck on the ritual without understanding what the ritual's about to do, what is meant to accomplish. It's like going to the store and buying a bottle of milk or a can of food or whatever it is that you buy and not using it. Just looking at the beauty of the bottle or the can or the bag of vegetables or whatever it is. You need to eat it. It's not just about its beauty, it's about the nourishment that it provides. Similarly, with our mitzvot, it's a beautiful thing to sit outside in the sukkah, but there's looking at it and drawing its spiritual energy is what we're going to try to achieve today. So it's a short story. It's a contemporary story. It's actually a very interesting story. It's related by a friend of mine who went to visit the Russian communities, and he ends up in the community of the city of Kazan. It's in the southwest part of Russia. It's part of the Tatarstan region, those that are familiar with the Russian map. And it's a Russian city like any other in terms of what I'm going to share. Now, we all know that during the time of communism, Jewish practice was forbidden. And many, many Jewish people were deprived of their Jewish faith, ritual, and everything that it is able to offer them, because they just weren't allowed to practice. They weren't allowed to go to Jewish day school. They weren't allowed to be taught. If you would be taught, you'd risk being sent to Siberia. In fact, my Zaidi and my great uncle and many in my family were sent to Siberia for opening synagogues underground and Jewish education underground. In this particular fellow's case, his name is Moshe Adinov. And Moshe's father was a sofer, was a scribe. He barely earned a living. He was an observant Jew. But for his little son, Moshe, he couldn't really provide much. He sent him to the regular public school. He couldn't educate him properly. They couldn't publicly observe Judaism. And there wasn't much that Moshe could do as a child. But his father in the home tried to share as many traditions as possible. And one of those was the sukkah. Now, it was very interesting because many people in Russia, especially those days, lived in apartment buildings. But Moshe's father happened to have a little shack, a little wooden house at the edge of town. But although that was a very poor dwelling, it did afford him an opportunity that on the festival, on the holiday of Sukkot, to be able to build a sukkah on the back porch. Because if you live in an apartment building, there's nowhere to build a sukkah. It has to be outdoors. And here, at least, although they were living in poverty, they at least were able to build a sukkah. In fact, it became the only sukkah in town. And secretly, Jews would go there to sit in the sukkah to be able to observe this mitzvah. Once again, my friends, we don't have to be so scared. We have sukkahs all over the place. Just give me a call, send me an email, and we'll make sure you can sit in the sukkah. But going back to the story. So this is in pre-war Europe, before World War II. And the Russians were very intent on wiping out, the communists were very intent on wiping out any Jewish practice. And here they are sitting in their little sukkah in the backyard. And Moshe observed this, the little boy. And he saw that on the sukkah, on the roof of the sukkah, there were just branches. There's just foliage. There was just nothing substantial. At least the walls were made of some piece of wood. But for all intents and purposes, he says he thought they just couldn't afford to make a roof. So the dad got some branches and put it on branches of trees and put it on the roof. Well, as every story goes, one day the father who kept the tradition alive passes away. And in 1965, when Moshe's father passes away, he feels that in honor of his father, although he received a Russian education and outwardly he was living a Russian life, he wasn't living a Jewish life, but to preserve the memory of the holiday, to honor his father, he would continue to build that sukkah. But he was able to afford more than just a bunch of branches. He had friends who were in the steel industry, and they were able to construct for him a roof of steel that to cover the sukkah. And year in and year out, Moshe would build the sukkah and put this roof on the top and make sure the sukkah was covered properly. And he felt so good until 1998. Chabad opens a center in the city of Kazan. There's no longer a threat of Jewish observance. We're now living in post-perestroika, when all the limitations were removed and Jews were able to practice freely. And Chabad opened many centers throughout Russia. And one of those centers was in Kazan. And the shliach there, Rabbi Gorelik, invites this Moshe to the sukkah. And Moshe, and he says, we'll have a beautiful meal at sukkahs, come over. And Moshe happened to know about Sukkot. He comes, he sees a beautiful sukkah, sees wine, a beautiful meal. It's really built nicely. And then his eye looks up and his heart drops. His eye looks up and he sees the same foliage, the same branches that his father used to put on the tree, on the sukkah. And he realizes that his father didn't put the foliage on the tree because he couldn't afford it, because that's the way it was meant to do. This roof of the sukkah is meant to be of a temporary nature. And he becomes all upset and white. And the rabbi looks at him and says, Moshe, what happened? And he tells him the story, how he tried to honor his father. And for the last 30 years or whatever it was, about 30 years, he was just desecrating the honor of father. He did it all wrong. And the shliach turns to him and says, Moshe, I guarantee you that in heaven, they're looking, God and your father and your grandfather and Moses was looking down at your sukkah and realizing that you did it from the depth of your heart, not knowing any better. They appreciated the sukkah for the sincerity that you put into it. But now that you know, now you build a sukkah properly. But don't ever regret a moment for doing it the way you thought it should have been done. It made your father so proud. And this is a beautiful story because it says so much about our faith and our tradition. There are rules, and we need to learn and study about what is the correct way to do a mitzvah. But one should never feel bad that they misunderstood or they may have done it wrong, but did it sincerely, with sincerity. Because what's as equally important when we do a mitzvah is to connect to the spirituality of the mitzvah. Now, certainly, we can't just say, I'll connect to the spirituality and do the mitzvah any way I want. Because that's like saying, I'm going to get the nourishment, but I'm not going to eat. I'm going to fast and I'll be nourished. There are certain ways that we nourish our soul. But what's equally important to understand is that when we do a ritual, to draw the inspiration. And the inspiration of the sukkah is that as permanent as the walls that we put up in our life, we must always remain cognizant of a greater purpose and a greater meaning in everything that we do. And certainly in these most vulnerable times that we are in these most challenging times that we're in, maybe our walls are not that strong that we have are built around us. But just like the walls may be weakened, one thing never changes. That heavens that we see every Sukkot night, on the one hand, the roof may be a little bit permanent, but what we see may be temporary. The roof may be temporary, but what we see through that roof is the permanence that gives us the strength that whether the walls are shaky or strong, one thing never changes: our purpose and our relationship with God. I want to conclude with a interesting meme that I saw just this morning, and it goes like this: worrying is your conversation with yourself about things that you can't change. Praying is your conversation with God about things he can change. Worrying is your conversation with yourself about things that you can change. Prayer is your conversation with God about things that he can change. So powerful. It's the message of the sukkah. We may build the walls, but what really is important is what's above us. The mission that guides us, every day, every moment, and holds us so close to what we're really meant to do. Prayer does not just mean talking to a God that we don't connect to. Prayer means connecting with the true source of everything that happens, giving you the ability to have strength and determination, focus and clarity throughout your day and throughout the week. Have a good Yontif. And once again, if you need a sukkah, if you want a sukkah, call me, email me. I want to make sure that you can not only observe that ritual, but observe it correctly and draw from it properly, so that you eat in the sukkah, or you have a coffee in a sukkah, or you just schmooze in a sukkah, but you're able to look through that roof and see strength and draw inspiration. Have a good Yantis. Good Moed.